B, take it away.
Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls around the world, please rise to attention and salute our next special guest. It was in '77 when the chimes in heaven sounded the alarm that a new star was born. When at 15, he made the Virginia scene and showed them all a new frisbee form. Grit and imagination and skill and so much determination characterized this guy. And with hard work in the park, in the snow, and after dark, he was driven to excellence. And given the chance, he traveled the nation on summer vacation to indelibly make his mark. How fast did he rise and master the scene? He went from a young phenom to perennial champion in 2 short years. And even after his three-peat at the Rose Bowl, he couldn't buy his own beers. CS Disco, forget the mass this kid can throw. He threw the Araby across Niagara Falls and even across the Potomac, dressed as George Washington and all.
Yeah.
He's the star who can throw well and throw far. He's the Bobby Orr, the Wayne Gretzky, the Michael Jordan, or LeBron. Our next special guest is the greatest Frisbee athlete of all time and the world champion of awesome. On the tee, originally from McLean, VA, and now put into star in the Lone Star State. Joining us from Fort Worth, Scott Zimmerman.
Hey, thank you guys. Thank you.
Thanks for joining us.
What an introduction. That's too much.
It was there's a lot of material. This is going to be a fun show for anybody who doesn't really know anything about the past. Everything in that is true. You have rightly been applauded for all of your efforts and your accomplishments over the decades, and you're still out there and you're working the disc golf circuit, and it's great to see. So thank you for joining us. We really appreciate this.
My pleasure. I love what you guys are doing with these. I've caught several segments over the last many months, and you really interviewed some great players and historical figures. It's amazing how you're pulling all this together. Thanks for bringing me in.
Hey, no problem. Thanks a lot. Thanks for those great words. And the one thing I do have to correct, I learned from our phone call the other day that you're now in Augusta, Georgia.
That's right. We just moved over here. My wife, Leah, and I moved to Augusta. There's just as much disc golf here in Augusta as there is in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, believe it or not.
I don't doubt it. And there's a lot within an hour or 2 hours or 3 hours from there as well.
Yep. We're playing about 5 days a week now. She's a newcomer to the sport, but she's been playing about 9 months, and it's amazing to me watching her rapid progress.
Wow.
Nice.
You know, one of the most interesting things, I'll just touch on that right now, is a beginner at the sport tends to throw a frisbee or a disc that just kind of, sometimes they go up a little too high or they curve too much. But the mark of a champion disc golfer is you see them when you're behind the thrower and you see how far and fast their shots penetrate, just barely off the ground, sometimes, 3 feet off or 5 feet off, but not above head level. And
right.
So you see these pro disc golfers that are just throwing like 400-foot laser beams. And so that's what I've been telling my wife a lot is you got to keep working on throwing them low and flat. And she is just coming along with that and starting to get some birdies on holes that she was struggling with before. It's real exciting.
Right on.
Nice.
Wow.
All right, so we'll get to the first things first. Your number is 168, and
Yeah.
I know that there's quite a story with that. So why don't you go ahead and tell us what you remember about when you got your number back in
All right.
1977.
Well, that was only my third tournament. So here's the sequence for me. When I turned 15, I went to the Virginia State Championships, the first one. So that was about 50 years ago, and I won golf. And I was stunned. I was thrilled, excited to be playing with all these college boys and a couple of really famous male players. John Pickrell and Michael Conger had been to the famous Rose Bowl, so they were like the elite kings out on the field. And I managed to win golf that day. So then a month later, I begged my mom to take me to the Octad 77, where they had 8 overall events. And I was stunned when I was standing on the tee pad with John Connolly showed up, and he was on my card. Of course, I didn't know who he was. I didn't see the name before he got there. He just, they called it they said, "John, you're up," and he teed off. He threw his shot over this tree that I couldn't believe he was going over. It was an amazing shot. Of course, he was the world distance champion at the time. So then that Monday was Memorial Day, 1977. And that's when Steady Ed was running what he called the first professional disc golf tournament ever. But actually, Tom Monroe had run the first one that Saturday. in Mobile, Alabama. So most of the pro players on most of the pro Frisbee players were, at the Octad 77. It was a big overall tournament, and they went to Steady Ed's tournament on the Monday after, which was on a ski slope in New Jersey. So I showed up at that tournament on Monday. It's my first disc golf tournament only, and I walked up and tried to register with Ed. And he said, "Well, son, you're going to have to join the PDGA if you want to play in the tournament." So I, went and borrowed $5 from my mom, and he gave me number 168.
Nice.
So that was a fun tournament. I don't remember how well I did there. I do remember there were 28 people in the tournament, and Craig Van Sickle won that. It was playing down a ski slope. And when you got down to the bottom, you could ride the lift back up to the top. But all the holes were either going downhill or across the slope, And so it was really an exciting course. Wow. That was Memorial Day 1977. So that's when I got that number.
Nice, right on. So according to Statmando, and this doesn't necessarily make sense, but it said that you had career. Oh, actually, I'm wrong about that. Actually, I'm wrong about the second part. It says you had 67 career events, which obviously there's holes in those records. It says you cashed 16 times, and you had 49 top 10s, which I find hard to believe. Like I believe that you had 49 top 10s, but I can't. It's hard to believe that there's only 16 cashes out of that. But then you had 19 podiums, which is also not making sense. But
right,
wins in there. Like, so those numbers kind of seem backwards, but I'm not sure how that worked out.
Well, there has been a lot of work going on with the help of Dan Roddick to try to retrieve historical records. I know he and the other folks at the PDJ and some of the hard workers have contacted old, former tournament directors and asked them for those records. There is a lot of confusion about that because of some of these were not officially PDGA tournaments. They were run by Whammo and in fact promoted somewhat by Ed Hedrick. But they weren't exactly PDGA tournaments until around 1982. So back in the days of the 70s, when I was getting good in 1977 and 78, there were a lot of Whammo state championships and the North American Series, and then of course the WFC, the Rose Bowl.
And the thing about the North American Series is when you saw the tour at the beginning of the year, they wouldn't have, say, golf at every one of the events. Some would be, say, self-cut flight and freestyle or distance and DDC or whatever, usually 2 events. And so the PDJ, you will find records of certain NAS event results only from the golf side. But you have to really, I've been going back, flyingdiscmuseum.com, which you write, you've at least written one long article on there for. They have digitized most of the publications, or as many as they can get from back in the.
That's right. They've got dozens of magazines and different newsletters that people were writing back in those days. And Flying Disc Museum is amazing.
And it's tough because you only see your name in print if you had a podium finish or you had a place top 5 or top 4.
That's right.
So we know that there were a lot of people at some of these events. We just only have 5 names from, say, freestyle or the golf side.
Yeah.
So just in my quick research getting prepared for this show, I found, say, for instance, in 1979. Which is a big year for you, there were a lot of events missing from the PDGA database, even the Statmando database, which were right there in the Frisbee World magazine. So we're going to get to all that eventually. There's lots of cool stuff to talk about with that. Okay. I just want to keep going with the framework.
All right. Well, so moving on from that information, you're twice an author at this point in the published books. One called Champion Level Disc Golf, Learn to Think and Play Like a Pro with Dave Fehlberg. There we go.
Is that showing up backwards for you guys?
No,
it's working just fine. It's okay. Like it should.
That's Dave Fehlberg on the cover.
I used this photo today with the promo and Chasing Disc Golf and the overall title, and that was co-authored by Stork, or did Stork?
No, this is just I wrote this one, but Stork wrote the foreword for this book.
Oh, okay.
Okay. All right.
Now,
so this one is an autobiography of a bunch of interesting stories, and this one is all technical for an aspiring anyone who wants to get really good at disc golf really fast.
Nice.
Right. And so we actually have this as a website too. So just remember championleveldiscgolf.com is our website where you can get the book.
All right, cool. Well, so you were a 4-time IFA World Frisbee champion, and you hold 4 world records, and then you were 3-time Virginia State disc golf, Virginia disc golf champion, and the first time you won it, you were 15 at 1977, which is really amazing. And then you were inducted into the first induction of the inaugural class in 2017 with Eric Wooten, Larry Schindel, Hugh Lowry, Captain Snap, and Dave Griffin. And one thing that was funny, I talked with Paul. He didn't get a chance to look at all my notes, and I told him that Eric Wooten was your neighbor around the corner and he babysat you. And he goes, "Oh, well, that explains it." Yeah. I was like, "Yeah, here's why they appeared quite a bit together, because like they knew each other. He knew him since he was a kid."
Yeah, we turned pro together, throwing the 119 and the 141 across the street in McLean, Virginia, from our house. And we used to just play catch over there, freestyling. And back in those days, freestyling for us was like tipping and maybe an airbrush and maybe a body roll. And we were doing some nail delays, but not very many tricks. And one of the guys who used to live across the street followed me home one day after our session. I didn't know this man. He followed me to my house, and he before I went in, he said, "Hey, son, are you guys going back out there again?" And I said, "Well, we just finished." And he said, "Well, I'm having a dinner party for my friends, and we would pay you and your partner $5 each if you would put on a show for us." So I said, "Really?
Nice.
You know, $5 for a 14-year-old kid." This was 1976, Thanksgiving time. And so I ran as fast as I could around the corner to go get Eric and hope he was still, just getting home. And I said, "Eric, we got to go back out there." So the guy paid us $5 each, and that was how we turned pro in 1977.
That's awesome.
Okay, so
you were already pro before you even knew it,
right? Before you even played in the tournament. So I can't remember where I got this from, what website, but this is from your writing, and you say that at age 14, you randomly saw 2 professional Frisbee shows that increased your interest to play after school every day. And that got me interested. What were the 2 Frisbee shows? Do you remember?
Yeah, I remember both of them really well. So the first one, and this is really amazing. I lived in Northern Virginia on the other side of town from Capitol Center, which is in Largo, Maryland. My mom, just with a friend, just randomly took me to see a Harlem Globetrotters game one night. And there was John Kirkland and Victor Malafronte at halftime. So I remember thinking at the beginning of the game, before the game started, the announcer said, "And today for the halftime show, we're going to have the Frisbee professionals." And I thought, well, that's good, because if I'm bored by the basketball, at least I got the halftime show to see what's going on. And I had only been throwing the Frisbee in the yard a little bit. Before that, I was not a serious player, but I thought it sounded cool what they were going to do at halftime. And boy, I wasn't disappointed. They did a juggling act where they play with 4 super pros, and they were skipping it on the basketball court to each other. So at any one time, they were on opposite sides of the basketball court. There were 4 discs in flight simultaneously. Wow. Where they're skipping one, or maybe one is in the air, and they were juggling that for like 20-30 seconds. I was amazed at how well they were controlling that, all the way across the court, throwing it right to each other. Those guys were champions. And of course, Victor and John Kirkland, I was already subscribing to Frisbee World pretty soon around that time, and I knew their names. I was blown away by those guys.
It's pretty amazing that you just happened to be there.
I know. I got lucky.
This is perfect.
I asked John one day, and I said, "How many shows did you do?" And I think he told me they did like 400 shows with the Globetrotters in just over a year. And I said, "Are you kidding me? That's like more than 1 a day." And he said, "Yep, sometimes we were doing 2 a day." So it was pretty amazing.
Man,
nice.
Talk about quadruple disc court right there, right? That's the original.
Yeah, exactly.
So what was the other show?
It was Victor Malafronte and Tom McCran performing on ice skates for what's the name of the Capitals hockey team? The Capitals.
The Capitals.
Okay, so they did it at the first, at the first and the second intermission, and this was an amazing scene by Victor Malafronte. So the announcer says, "Okay, folks, Victor is now going to attempt to throw it into the goal from full court." So Victor's getting his sidearm Super Pro lined up. And one thing I was amazed by this time I already had started my little Frisbee collection on my wall. And I had an orange and a blue Super Pro. That's what's available in the stores. Victor and Tom were out there throwing red ones and blue ones and green ones. And I thought, man, they must have a connection at Whammo because those don't exist, you know? So Victor is out there and he's kind of lining this shot up. And this is where he's like the true professional. He goes over to the maintenance man who's on ice skates out there. And he says, no, you're going to have to move this net. This is, you know, this net right here is in the way. I gotta be right here. So they asked him to lift up the net and move that. So Victor's now lining up the shot a little bit better. He's got this just the way he wants. He's going to stand right where that net was. And he's lining this up. He throws this sidearm. It goes out over the penalty box, comes back into the far side, and bam, rings in the net. You wouldn't believe that if you were sitting there and you were a 14-year-old kid. You couldn't believe that shot. And Victor did it just so perfect. His sidearm was just deadly accurate, man. And he was a lot of people don't know, but he was a big distance thrower too. And so was John Kirkland, of course. Even going into the 80s, John Kirkland was a distance champion. Victor Malfrani had at one time thrown a pro 520 feet, I think it was, but it seemed like what I heard was it was in the warm-ups before the tournament, so it didn't count as a world record. Okay. But Kirkland held the world record a few times, trading back and forth with Dave Johnson. And I was reading all that in Frisbee World. Every 2 months or every 3 months that would come out, quarterly. And I was studying all the names and all the tournaments, and I was looking at all those and thinking, I wish I could go to Colorado, but here I am in Virginia and I got no money and I'm in high school. What am I going to do? So, I was planning out all the tournaments for each year. Oh, and I know you're going to get to the part about 1979. I'll just tell you, when that news came out in winter of 78 that they were going to have the $50,000 tournament, that just, wow. I was thinking, oh, man, I got to go to San Francisco to that North American Series tournament. And then after that one, I'll go down to Los Angeles and I'll be in that $50,000 disc golf tournament. So that's how exciting it was to plan your summer trips. Back then, you had to do it through Frisbee World. That's the only way. We didn't have Facebook,
Well, Mace and I are of the generation where we got into the disc golf game when it was just basically Disc Golf World News. And I'm up here in Toronto. We get a lot of snow in the wintertime. And so I wouldn't go out and play in the snow. I wouldn't. I would just be consuming these magazines, page after page. So I totally get you. Before the internet, before, information and access on demand, you just had to make do with the small materials that you had.
Yep.
And it probably got, well thumbed and well used and probably spilled some sodas on there. And
well, the World News is the same thing too. I mean, the Disc Golf Journal was the same thing too. Like that was what you got. And like it's really interesting because I related to what you were talking about ordering from the back of the magazine, because that happened in my early days as well. Because I mean, nobody was selling for golf discs, and that was super rare. But the other thing too was, I thought about times when it was snowing and I was like, I'm not going out there.
Well,
but you were doing it every night.
Yeah.
So the next, going back to my sequence, and I'll just tell you this story, is when I was 15, I had those tournaments. But when I was 16, I had to hitchhike through Florida to get to a North American Series tournament with Ross Snyder. He was my mentor. Okay. And so after I lived in Washington, D.C. area and played a lot with Eric Wooten and Larry Schindel and Michael Conger were my mentors. Larry Schindel started the D.C. Frisbee Club. But then I lived when I was a sophomore in high school, my dad moved to Atlanta. And so I had Ross Snyder as my mentor, and he was a great disc golfer, and he'd been to the Rose Bowl. So I really looked up and envied him. And he took me down to the Sarasota, Florida North American Series tournament. But the guy we were driving with, the car broke down right when we got into Florida. So there we are, and we waited in a tiny city in Florida for, thinking, what's the mechanic going to do with this foreign BMW? He doesn't know how to fix it. We waited around all day, and Ross finally said, if we're going to make the tournament, we got to go now. So we hitchhiked out on the interstate, and we barely got to the tournament in time. But between that tournament and me going later on that summer to Huntsville, Alabama, and then at the end of the year, I went to Rochester, New York. And nice. I earned enough points to go to the 78 WFC, World Frisbee Championships. And that was so exciting for me. And I came in 22nd overall. I'll, always remember that. Craig Van Sickle won it. He was only 17 years old, but I really envied him, what he was doing. He was such a graceful player. He was amazing. That kid, he was so small compared to the big distance throwers like Joe Youngman and John Kirkland. But Craig could throw so far. He won a couple of distance tournaments that year because he had an amazing pirouette on a spindle. When he puts his plant foot down, he literally would spin on it. Unlike today's players that have a follow through, the throwing motion was quite different back in those days because every throw had to be with hyzer. The discs were just less stable than the distance drivers of today. They weren't bevel edge in 77, 78. So anyway, came in 22nd overall, and I set my mental goal for myself. I want to be the world overall champion. The overall was the big thing back then. It wasn't just golf. So I was committing an awful lot of time to freestyle and double disc court, and I played golf every day anyways. So all I knew that I had to do was just really improve my distance and improve my freestyle and learn this interesting game, double disc court. But the problem is most of that was happening in Southern California. So I really dreamed about how can I, go and live in Southern California so I can learn this game, double disc court. And but anyway, 78, after coming in 22nd, that winter in DC, we had an incredible blizzard. There was 28 inches of snow on the ground, and I was out practicing every single day. I kept a journal, and I never from that Rose Bowl 78 to Rose Bowl 79, there wasn't a single day that I didn't practice at least 5.5 hours. Every day was over 5.5 hours of practice, every single day of training. And there were, during the middle of the summer, some of the training was 9 to 10 hours. And that included all 6 events. So I would be riding all around on my bike around McLean, Virginia. I would take my golf disc to McLean Central Park on my bike. Then I'd come back home, get lunch, and I'd put all my distance discs in a bag and take them to the field across the street. Then I'd throw some MTAs. Then I'd do freestyle in my backyard and practice putting. And I would later in the day, take all my DDC discs and just throw them out on the field. And what I would do is, just to be really efficient, I would put wood blocks down on the ground. I had sawed off some old 2x4s, and I had these little square blocks, and I just put down the corners of the court. I didn't have a rope court and didn't want to take the time to set it up. So I just put the corners down and pasted off real quick. And I used that to just practice my throws over and over. The hammer throw, as you call it, is real popular in DDC, and also the scuba throw. Because in the 78 Rose Bowl, I saw Jerry Gear and Mark Horn win the World DDC Championships, and Jerry Gear had this wicked scuba burn. Now, you guys know today, disc golfers don't call this a scuba throw. This is what they call the scuba throw after Brody popularized it. Brody called this a scuba because he picked that up from Ultimate players who somehow misnamed it over the decades. Ultimate players thought, hey, that's a scuba. He scored a goal with a scuba. But back in the day, this was the original scuba, was like this. It's just a backhand grip, but you flip it this way, you put your opposite foot forward. So that was a burn shot in DDC, and I had to learn that. I taught it to myself because I saw how wicked Jerry Gear was with that. But anyway, that's covering a lot of ground there. But that winter, I'll tell you the story about that snow. Okay, so one night I'm out at 9 p.m. practicing distance with my bag of 20 hot stamp rejects that I bought through the back of Frisbee World from the IFA. And I told myself, I'm doing this straight run up for disc golf, just like in disc golf today. You just run up straight on the tee pad. It's not called a 360, but it's called an X step, right? Well, back in those days, distance throwers, if they want to be good, they have to switch from an X step to a 360 turnaround run up. Some of the distance throwers today can do the 360, but a lot of players don't. A lot of the top disc golfers, they throw incredibly far without doing the spin around run up. But Craig Van Sickle was my model for how to do it in distance. And I just told myself that night, standing out in the snow, I said, well, I'm not going to be able to do a 360 like Craig does. So I'm not going to try to mimic his style. He's just too graceful, and he's, had dancing instruction. And so I just kind of backed up from the line and said, well, where would I put my feet if I was going to do this? And I developed my own 360 run up. And then I shortened it to just 6 steps because I thought if I was running 10 steps, I thought I'm not really gaining any speed with those extra steps. So why not shorten it down to 6? So I developed my 6-step 360 run up, and that helped me become a top distance thrower in 1979. Now I wasn't of Joe Youngman's caliber. He was the champ in distance in 78 and 79. But I won a couple of distance tournaments that he wasn't at. And I was in the top 10, I think, in the world championships.
Well, let's take it back to 77, your first year kind of in the historical record in terms of flying disc sports. Well, Mace, you take it away.
Well, so in 77, you were 15 years old. And again, like we said earlier, Larry Schindel, Larry Schindel pops up in your story. How did you meet Larry? Was he?
Oh, that's a neat
just like
story.
Was he one of your neighbors?
Yeah, so I'm out there in my coming home from school every day, throwing my frisbees around the neighborhood, and my dad buys me a book called Frisbee: A Practitioner's Guide by Stancil Johnson. That's the Bible of frisbee back in those days. And I'm reading through that book like crazy, and there's a chapter on disc golf, so I made up my own frisbee golf course around the neighborhood. I'm playing that every day, and then I don't know how this happened. This is another one of those just lucky stepping stones in my frisbee career. I would eat breakfast at my mom's table every morning and read the Washington Post. Usually, I only read the front page of the main news and the sports. Okay. For some reason, this day, I'm reading the classified ads. I don't know why I was doing that, but there's this tiny little ad, 2 lines, and it says, interested in playing in the DC Frisbee Club? Call Larry, 282-1212. So
no way.
So I called up Larry and I said, hey, I'm a Frisbee player. What's the Frisbee Club about? And he said, really? What city are you in? And he said, well, I'm going to have to call you when I can come over and see you. So we talked for quite a while, and I told him I got a disc golf course, come on over and you can play with it. So he drives over to see me, and he plays my course, and he does really well on it. And then we went to the high school to throw some more, and he starts airbrushing it. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. I'd never seen this before. We were playing with a Super Pro. He airbrushed it a few times, and then he did a foot brush. He kicked it with his foot, and then he jumped up and caught it under his leg. It blew my mind. I'd never seen anything like this. He was a real pro, and so he got me hooked on that. And then he was critical in my career also, because not only did he start the club, but he volunteered to drive me down to that first Virginia State Championship.
And that's an interesting story right there, too.
Yeah, my mom wanted to take the family to Puerto Rico that weekend. And I said, Mom, I got to go to this tournament that Eric Wooten is running down in Fredericksburg. It's an hour away. And I said, I'll tell you what, Larry will drive me down there and Eric will take care of me while I'm there, right? And they agreed to do that. And Mom said yes. So Larry picks me up Saturday morning early, and we go down to Fredericksburg, and we're out there throwing the Frisbee around on ball circle, registering for the tournament with 60 other people. And I'm thinking, wow, this is scary because all these guys are older than me. They're like in their 20s and 30s. And then Papa Jack Roddick drives up on his motorcycle. He came down from Pennsylvania to play in this Frisbee tournament. He's 45 years old. He's in the seniors division. And I'm thinking, this is not like baseball in high school where all the other kids on the team are my age. What's going on here, And so that was my first Frisbee tournament.
Wow. But you win the golf. The records don't show what the margin was, but do you remember?
Yeah, it was 2 strokes over Michael Conger, and I'm sure a lot of people didn't believe that. They thought, what's going on with this kid? But Eric Wooten was on my card, and he was one of the tournament directors, so he'll vouch for it. And then, so I knew when I came back the next year in 78, there was a lot of pressure to see if I could repeat. And by that time, I was really into Frisbee, and I had many more Frisbees. So I did manage to win it again in 78 and 79. And I'll tell you a funny thing about 77. I carried 7 discs. I didn't have a disc golf bag, but I carried 7 discs. One of them was a master. And, I had my pro, and I had a CPI All-Star, which I thought I had only had a few throws with that since I just bought it from Frisbee World. But it was really an amazing flyer, but I stuck with my Super Pro most of the time. And I even carried a 97G Whammo, Whammo World Class. It was called a 97G or the 70 mold. it was so tiny compared to the other disc. I really didn't know what I would do with that disc. I never had any intention to throw it on any holes. I just thought, well, I better carry it just in case. But I had no plan to throw that disc. It was just too small. So the reason that's an interesting story is you take an AVR or like this Gateway Wizard, and these discs are one size diameter smaller than the 70 mold. So by today's standards, players would pick up that 70 mold and say, boy, this is like a big mid-range, a little bigger than a mid-range. And that was tiny to us back then.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, this is what really is so curious and so ironic is that you were playing with max size Frisbees, throwing into much smaller targets that with much smaller gauge of chain and fewer chains on the circuit.
Yep. The basket was also not as deep. So baskets back then were only this tall. A lot of time, and it happened to me in a tournament. One of the old guys, one of the old pros, I think it might have been Michael Conger. There was a disc in the basket, not his, but I went ahead and putted, and my disc bounced off the top and back over the edge. And Michael Conger said to me, "Yeah, son, you should learn. You never want to putt when there's another disc already in the basket." See, now the baskets are like this deep.
Oh yeah.
About 10 inches, right? Something like that. But back then they were only barely 4 inches deep, and and they were smaller diameter.
I was gonna say like maybe almost a quarter smaller.
And also those Mach 1s, the baskets also flanged out a little bit too, so you could have just come in and scoop out.
Flyer into that tray.
Well, yeah, you don't really know that it's going in, even when you put it dead center. What really happens is it just does a cut through a lot of times, so it goes right through the chains all the way through sometimes. But a lot of times it would also hit the chains and go all the way to the pole and then bounce back out over the edge. So it didn't take Steady Ed very long to realize that. And they came up with, first thing they did, they made the basket a little deeper. They went to 12 chains instead of 10. It took a long time to get to 18 chains. If I remember, that was like 4 or 6 years before they went to 18 chains. But he thought, well, 12 chains, that should be a lot. And the basket's deeper and a little bit wider. So it would hold the 141 grams, which, a 141 gram Frisbee would be this much wider in diameter. A 119 would be this much, and a 141 would be that much. So
it's like trying to get a school bus in a one-car garage.
Yeah, they didn't fit all the way. The 141s barely fit in the basket.
So I have 2 questions about that first tournament. First of all, do you remember how much money you won and what you did with that money? And second of all, were your parents happy that you got to miss the Puerto Rico vacation, but you came back?
Oh yeah. Yep, very excited about that. But there was no prize money for that. I wish I had it here, but I got a little IFA state championship trophy, and I've kept that one all these years. That one meant a lot. They had the little gold Frisbee glued onto the wooden plaque that looked like a trophy. And IFA was producing those and sending them out to the state championships all over America. So I went up and down the East Coast to lots of state championships from 77 to 1981. And, picked up a lot of those little state championship trophies, by the way. But I heard one time Tom Monroe had the record for the most of those because he was going all around the Southeast winning lots of state championships. But I was winning distance in golf and MTA, and sometimes they had accuracy and freestyle. Eric and I did really well in freestyle at a number of those.
Well, so that brings me to the next thing I want to mention is that you and Eric had a special relationship because you grew up right around the corner from him, correct?
Yep. He was, when like 10 years earlier, he had been babysitting for me and my sister. And then he went away to college, which, that's another one of those lucky stepping stone things. He went to a college, Mary Washington College, where they happened to have this booming Frisbee culture with John Pickrell and Hugh Lowry and Shannon Elder. And Eric picked it right up while he was going to college there. And I was picking it up just parallel to that on my own by reading that book, and I had contacted Larry Shindell. So then our paths converged when Eric came home for a Thanksgiving vacation once, and he said, "Well, we're having a tournament down there." So that's how that happened. And then we did a lot of Frisbee shows together with John Pickrell and Martha Fay, the Frisbee dog.
Wow, that's awesome.
Nice. So you just kind of found yourself in the right spot, like just literally in the right spot.
Well, it's interesting you say that, because I got to tell you, I'm really lucky in my career. People think, he must be some kind of an amazing kid that he won all those world championships. But there are like 115-year-old kids in America right now who want to be the next Ricky Wysocki or Paul Macbeth. And many of them just don't have the opportunity. It's partly, it's not about just the intensity and the grit, as you mentioned at the beginning of the show, but it's also about your financial circumstances. Now, my family was not wealthy at all, but my mom just did whatever she could to support me. When I started my Frisbee collection on the wall, it drove her nuts because I thought I had to collect every Frisbee. So we're in a shopping mall one day, and I saw this new mold 6 original Frisbee, the regular Frisbee. And I said, oh, Mom, I don't have a mold 6 yet. And it's orange. I don't have an orange one either. So I need another $1 for this. And she just flipped out. She finally, I pushed her over the limit there by saying I needed another $1. She'd already given me too much for all these Frisbees. And I was never going to throw this thing anyway. So why did I think I needed to have this? I don't know. But anyway, you've got to have a support network that will drive you to the tournaments. Like I interviewed Ricky Wysocki once, and he talked about that with his older guys taking him to tournaments. I had that with not just with Larry and with Eric, but also other guys around my neighborhood. Dave Taylor drove me all the way to the Rochester tournament and to the Toronto tournament. We stopped at Niagara Falls and threw a Frisbee out into Niagara Falls before we realized that was an environmental pollution, not a good idea. But and we'll come back to Niagara later. So
yes,
at any rate, I had these guys who were taking me down to the Washington, D.C. Frisbee Club. I had guys taking me down to, like Ross Snyder driving me down to Sarasota to that North American Series tournament. And people were just supporting me because I wanted to tag along. And I said, hey, I got to go to Rochester. How can I get there? And then I could talk an older guy into going with me. He would drive, and I would split the hotel with him somehow. So that whole network of support is what enabled me to just not only the inner fire that was burning in me was driving me to practice every day. I did countless hours of individual field work. So I was a very lonely aspiring athlete. I didn't always play with others because I just thought, well, I can play 3 rounds of golf by myself and there's nobody else to play with anyway. So I would go and play 3 rounds of golf in one day. Then I would go to the field and throw my distance disc and my MTA disc. So there just wasn't anybody else to hang out with that much because Eric was away at college. So we would just freestyle on weekends sometimes when we got together. But aside from that inner drive, you also have to have somebody that, if you're a 15-year-old kid, you got to have somebody driving you to these tournaments and to the Frisbee Club where you can meet other players.
Well, we had Steve Valencia on last year.
Steve.
And there's an interesting parallel between you guys in that he's 14, 15, growing up right across the street from La Mirada. Yeah. And he meets John Kirkland. They become friends, and John becomes his kind of mentor and teacher. And this is where your paths diverge. He had wanted John to take him to the World Frisbee Junior Championships in Atlanta that year. But it was along the same kind of lines, like you can trust your child to these people because they're good Frisbee people. Unfortunately, his mom said, no, we're going to go with you instead. But I find it interesting the parallels between you two with this great burning desire to play and a passion for it, but also great personality that would allow people to kind of be drawn to you too.
Thanks. Well, I didn't know that Kirkland was a great mentor for Steve because I thought I was Steve's mentor. I'm surprised he didn't tell you that.
Well, and that's there's 2 different things there that are just amazing common threads to this whole situation. And they even, like, we talked about this as well. I mean, that it appeared in my disc golf career in with a couple different people, but folks taking youngsters under their wings, folks,
Yep.
Like spending enough time in the local park. There's a lot of guys and gals, obviously a lot of people know about this, but a lot of us are spending a lot of time with people that are from a vastly different age range. But
right.
Over that period of time, it's through that whole camaraderie and fellowship that's just kind of a natural part of being.
Yeah, that's a big part of the Frisbee family. You're right. You'll see that over and over again.
These older folks are taking these younger folks under their wings, and And then the other thing is too that it's just like, oh, we all want to see you succeed too, and
Yep.
here we go.
Yeah.
Let me help you elevate. So
Oh, it was exciting to watch Steve play. I would go down there to La Mirada, and at night we found out we could play the course at nighttime because the lamps around the sidewalks were close enough to the baskets, and we could figure out where all of our shots were because they kept the grass pretty well cut. So we were able to play 18 holes after dark. And we did that countless times in the winter of 84, I want to say, maybe, or 85, maybe. I'm not sure. But we were doing that. Steve and I played there many times.
So I want to show you now. We're going to move up to 88, and I want to show you a picture. Or sorry, 78. Now you're living in Georgia. Do you remember this photo?
Sure do. Yeah.
So this is on the cover or in the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, and the caption is "Hippie throwing a frisbee." Would you define yourself as a hippie at that point?
Yeah, you know what I say about this photo is I apparently was trying really hard to be like the older hippies that I was hanging out with. So I got the idea for the bandana from Eric Wooten, but I thought, I was 16 at that time, and I won distance at that tournament right there over Tom Monroe and Ross Snyder in the finals in the bowl. There was swirling wind in there, and somehow I figured my disc got lucky, and I was able to throw it a little farther than those guys. But I just wanted to, be in the crowd with the 24-year-old guys and the 30-year-old guys, and they were all looking like hippies. So I thought, I got to grow my hair long too.
Well, it looks like you either are channeling your inner Richie Smits, or without a beard, you're about to become Ken Westerfield. So
yeah, there you go.
Either way, I think it works.
Well, I envied Ken a lot, so that's a compliment that you're mentioning him.
So let's just jump right into the 1978 World Frisbee Championships. You get to go. Did you qualify at Sarasota? Is that where you got the invite?
Well, somehow So the idea was they took your points for your best 3 events, I think it was, and I went to Huntsville, Alabama for golf and DDC probably, and I went to Sarasota for MTA and golf, I think it was, right. And then Rochester was freestyle and golf, I guess. So somehow after those 3 tournaments, I got a letter to qualify. And man, I was training like crazy. And one thing I remember that August, when I got that letter from Whammo, signed by Dan Roddick, you're invited, please let us know if you accept the invitation. And so I was training like crazy. The Star Wars movie just came out. My dad took us to the Star Wars movie. And so we're in the movie theater, and I'm watching these, laser beams and bullets flying around and everything. It's like the most exotic movie you've ever seen in 1978. When we stepped out of the movie theater that night, it was, warm evening in the middle of the summer. And the thought hit me, wow, I haven't thought about Frisbee for 2 hours. That was the only time that 2 hours went by without me thinking about, I'm getting ready to go to the Rose Bowl, So I built this box to hold all my discs because I thought, how am I going to get all of my important discs for all the events? How am I going to get those to California? So I built a box. I was a kind of a hobbyist woodworker, and I wrote the word Frisbee on the side of it. So there I am at LAX waiting for my luggage to come out, and or actually San Francisco airport. So I'm getting ahead. That was LAX. So the lady next to me says to her husband, "Oh, that looks like a little coffin." And so it was a little brown box that I had stained, and it was only 3 feet long to hold about 50 discs. But the lady thought it was a coffin, and then I just pulled it right off and said, "No, this is my Frisbee box,"
Nice. So, okay, so you're consuming the magazines, you're doing the tour in 78, you're preparing yourself for the World Championships, and in your mind, Cray Van Sickle is in the landscape. He's shaping his own destiny for 78. It's going to turn out to be a two horse race between him and John Kirkland. He ends up winning overall that year. Right. Did you get to meet Cray in person before the World Championships?
I don't think so. I mean, Cray had a lot going on. He was a star, and I was pretty much a nobody in 78. So probably didn't have much words with Cray, but I just was always envying him from the sidelines because he played in the DDC finals with John Kirkland against Al Bonapane and Charlie Duvall. And I remember sitting right at the front of that and watching those DDC finals in 1978, which Al and Charlie won that. And I was just thinking to myself, man, how can I get better at this sport? These guys are really good. But Cray and John made it. They didn't get to play as much as Al and Charlie, who had a big community in the Los Angeles area for DDC. But Cray and John made it to the finals just because they were so good with just throwing every frisbee right in the court. You know, they knew how to throw these hyzer shots that went to the back and curved in, and they were good at that. And it was really fascinating to see how these teams could just, one player knew how to tip the disc up and keep it up in the air so the other player could do a quick catch and throw. That was an amazing skill of teamwork that they were doing. And I didn't have a regular partner or regular 4 people to play with. So my aspiration at that point was, I wish I lived in Southern California. And I moved there 3 years later.
So you mentioned some interesting names already there, and I did want to talk to you about Charlie and Al Bonapane. We just had Al on the show just a couple of weeks ago.
Yep.
And but a lot of people out there have no idea who Charlie Duvall is.
Oh, he was an amazing backhand thrower. So, Al invented the Bonapane grip like that. Charlie and Harold used it also. Harold Duvall, who started Innova, and Charlie was a co-founder with Harold. Charlie and Al and I were playing on the same Guts team, the Foothill Guts team, and we won the 1982 IFT.
Okay.
But Charlie had this amazing backhand burn that he could do in double disc court. So he threw it in a way with this thumb on the top to get the nose down, and he would get the disc traveling across now it's 15 or 17 meters between courts, but back then it was 15 meters. He would get the disc to dip down right over that line. So you had this burn coming in at 70 miles an hour. You had to catch it, and it's dipping down on you right down to your toes. It was really hard that's what made Charlie such an amazing DDC player. Well, in Guts, he would throw it this way, and it would be coming. He would throw it with a little flutter on it on purpose, so it's coming in wobbling like this, and it's hard to track it, and it's coming in at a roller angle, and again down below your shin, and you had to somehow pop that thing up in Guts and see if you could catch it. So Charlie had an amazing backhand throw. It was extremely fast.
Wow, it's cool to it feels like for us, we've only heard these names, so it's kind of like recovering a sense of the past, because Charlie is certainly one of those legendary names as one of the founders of Innova, but no one's ever heard of him or about him pretty well since the early 80s. So it's great that you still have that connection and you can make it present.
Well, Charlie was, when I moved to Southern California in 1981, I had won the world overall championships twice, and I was training to try and defend it for my 3rd time. And Charlie just befriended me right away at Lacey Park and said, you want to play DDC together in the world championships? And I thought, wow, he's such an amazing back player. He knew how to jump and tip it, and I would be playing front and try to figure out what he was telling me to do. And so that summer, he already told me he would be my partner in DDC. I was really lucky to have Charlie as my mentor in DDC.
Okay. It's nice. Before we move on to 79, your dominant year, I just want to say, it's you're talking about Cray and John Kirkland not really coming from a very strong DDC background, but being very strong just frisbee throwers. You would see oftentimes at World Frisbee Championships, you'd have people who would dominate specific events, like Joe Youngman with distance, or Charlie Duvall with DDC, or the Coloradicals in freestyle, but they wouldn't apply those kind of skills across the board to all those events. There are very few people who are able to maybe not win every one of the overall events, but place high enough to be a consistent threat in the overall. And that's really, people find it difficult now to understand playing more than one sport. You guys were playing 6 to 8 of them just to win that title. That's incredible. Yeah. So now let's just move to 79, because this is where it all starts. This is the emergence of the Phoenix, right, Mace?
Mm-hmm. Thanks.
Oh yeah, for sure. And it's like, well, and this is one thing, like we've touched on this a little bit already tonight, but this is where it's really where the lid's going to come off the can of worms. But I don't know that I'm really amazed to hear you talk about your practice regimen already at the age of 14, 15, 16, and this is where it really comes to bring you to where you want to be, and that's that that winter of '79 in DC, when you had 18 inches of snow and you're out there like you talked about already, practice until 9 p.m. or later, trying to get yourself ready to play in the Rose Bowl, and then shortly, along that same time frame, you ended up making your first appearance in Volume 4, Number 2, 1979 of the Frisbee World magazine. So, talk a little bit about that. I mean, you've talked about it already, but
Right there.
and we're definitely going to touch on this, your practice routine and your drive again later. But what what possessed you to be that driven in that situation, and really, I mean, aside from emulating Cray and trying to win your championship, I mean, where'd you come up with that drive from?
Well, that's a good question. My dad did tell me that I had grit for pursuing it that strong, but I don't know. There was something about the way Stork had designed the overall competition and promoted it through Frisbee World and made the North American Series in a way that just was very attractive to a few hundred Frisbee players all over North America. Were traveling in, some of them in Volkswagen buses going to all these different tournaments and so forth. But for me, I just decided somehow, I guess I had this spirit in me that I was more of an overall type of person than a specialist. And so it never ceased to amaze me, the freestyle skills of the freestyle specialists. They were just a league way ahead of me. And, I have to mention Donnie Rhodes, who came on the scene in '79. I saw Donnie in a tournament in '78 where he was a good freestyle player. And then by the end of the summer in '79, all of a sudden, he was just out of this world. He was doing combinations of freestyle. I couldn't believe he would spin and keep it on his nail doing pulls 7 times. When I would do a pull in freestyle, sometimes I would typically do a combination move that would have 2 pulls, and I could sometimes do 3 before the spin was starting to die on the disc and I would lose control. So I had to catch it after either 2 or 3 combinations. Donnie would do 7 and he was still spinning on his toe and looking like he didn't need to stop. It was just unbelievable that he could keep the disc going that long on his finger. I was blown away. He was amazing in so many ways. But so anyway, that's just how good the specialists were. Of course, golf, there were lots of players specializing in golf, and there was double disc court, lots of players specializing in those. So if you want to be an overall player, you've really got your work cut out for you to train in all of those different events. And that is a time commitment that can only happen if, again, we come back to this opportunity for a 15-year-old kid. How can you become the world overall Frisbee champion? You're going to have to make your opportunity. For me, that was partly that I was ignoring my high school work. I was, thought Frisbee is much more important to me than high school. So I eventually, after I won the '79, after I won the world title, I couldn't go back to do my senior year in high school. Whammo called and said, do you want to be on the Dinah Shore show in Las Vegas in 3 weeks? And we'll fly you out there. And I said, yeah, that sounds exciting. I'm going to get paid. How much? $300-400. And, but I can't go to high school anymore because I'm getting to go and be with Hollywood stars. So I dropped out of high school. My dad said, that's the dumbest move you've ever done. At the time, he said, you're going to regret that. And I always thought, well, I'll tell you what, when I'm 30 years old, if the 30-year-old Scott Zimmerman regrets that, he's just going to tell himself that it seemed like the right thing to do for the 17-year-old Scott Zimmerman at the time. So I always just kind of rationalized it and said, it's going to be okay. But I ended up finishing high school by taking night classes instead, because that's the only way a Frisbee player can do it. I trained during the day and I took night classes. So I got my degree or my diploma. And but
how was the Dinah Shore show, by the way?
Oh, that was fun. I was there with Teresa Gaiman was the women's world champion.
Okay.
And we played, one of us was she was standing on a pedestal in the middle of the audience, and she threw it onto the stage to me. And she said she was real nervous that her shots would have to be that accurate. And I don't know how I got my throw to her because she was standing out in the middle of a crowd of 400 people, but somehow we managed to do the show for a couple minutes.
That's pretty cool.
She's a great player.
So '79 is chock filled with events for you. Just a quick iteration of it. You started in Atlanta, And May is a pretty thick month with events. You go to the first annual Louisville Disc Derby, and this
Oh
is
yeah, I
where
remember that.
Dave Greenwell gets his. He had played at a I think it was a 50K or an IFC or a WFC warm up tournament. But this was his. This according to the PDJ database, this is his first event. So you go there, and what I didn't realize was it was an overall event too,
Okay,
which
yeah.
is kind of lost to the sense of
Who
history.
won golf? I can't remember.
Snap on the
Oh,
golf. It
okay.
went Snap, Mark Watson, Tom Monroe, Dave Greenwell, and then you were fifth.
Okay, got it. That's cool.
But you took second in distance, you took third in MTA, and you teamed up with Mark Watson for freestyle, and you took second. So pretty close to winning the overall at the Louisville Disc Derby. What was it like? Do you remember Dave Greenwell, meeting him at the time? I mean, now we know he's such a star, but was it like he was just some other guy in the field?
Well, at that tournament, I don't have any recollection of him, but he and I met many times at a lot of, as the PDGA was growing all the way through 82 and 86 at the PDGA World Championships in 86 in Charlotte, North Carolina. There was a lot of times that Dave and I crossed paths and played together, and we were friends. But I don't remember, I have very few memories of that Louisville tournament.
Okay.
But I remember Clark putting it on, and I was contacting him for a few weeks. I think is it Clark Putnam? And
I think it was it HB or RB Clark?
HB Clark, yeah. So I was contacting him for a few weeks before saying, because I'm going to fly there on my own. I'm a 16-year-old, and what am I going to do when I get there? And he recommended, well, stay at this hotel. It's close to the scene, and then you can play in the events. So,
wow. Okay, well, let's talk about the events. Let's go to the big one here, Mace.
Here we go. May 15th through the 20th in 1979, you made your way down to Huntington Beach and played in the 50K disc golf tournament, and you took 10th, tied with Mark Horn, Dave Lindig, Doug Newland, and Glenn Teamstra. That was won by Tom Kennedy, and you cashed for $840. I mean, that had
Yep.
been a pretty good haul for 1979.
They back then they called it $1,050 because they gave us an extra 20% of Whammo merchandise. So they gave us whatever you won in the cash. They said, here's your gift certificate for this catalog. So you could pick out slingshots and hula hoops and frisbees, and you could get an extra 20%. So I ordered a whole bunch of 165 Gs for my extra $210 that I got in addition to the cash.
Wow.
But that was an exciting tournament. So what I did was I had to get permission to miss high school for a week. My mom says, my mom tells me if you get a letter of permission from all your teachers, you can go to that tournament. So I wanted to go to the San Francisco North American Series tournament the weekend before, because why not if you're going to fly out to Huntington Beach, you got to go to California anyway. You might as well go there the weekend before. So I go to San Francisco. I'm carrying my luggage and my Frisbee box from the airport. So I ride the bus. What's that?
It's still the coffin?
Yeah, it looks like a coffin. And I got my suitcase on top. So I ride the bus from the airport to Golden Gate Park because I know how to find Frisbee players, right? So the bus lets me out at the corner, and I'm carrying my luggage through Golden Gate Park. And I haven't found the Frisbee players for quite a while. I'm walking and walking, carrying the box and my luggage on top. And this is heavy. I didn't think about putting any wheels on it. So eventually I finally get to the other end of the park. It's a big park. Yeah, and there's the Frisbee players all warming up and stuff. So I put my luggage down, and I'm out there practicing with them. And during the tournament, I'm thinking, how am I going to get down to Huntington Beach in Los Angeles? So I'm asking around, and the Frisbee family is just super family oriented. And I met an old guy who says, you can ride in the back of my pickup truck if you want. There's a gas crisis going on, so we're only allowed to buy gas every other day, but I think I got it figured out. And I said, okay, sure, that sounds great. and he said, "You just give me a few dollars for gas." So this was during the gas crisis where you were restricted from buying. If your license plate was an even number, you could only buy Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday, or something like that.
Wow.
I remember being a little kid and seeing that.
Yeah, so there were long lines at the gas station. But anyway, we get in. I climb in the back of his pickup truck, and he drives me down to Los Angeles. Now I got to figure out how to get all the way to Huntington Beach. I get there, and I meet this guy who's throwing thumbers, Jeff Homburg. I don't remember him that well, but he says we met and we played a little warm up catch by the first hole. But Ed Hedrick, I was friends with Ed at that time, and I had been involved in a little controversy over that winter where Ed was, running the PDGA and the DGA, and there was a group of players that wanted to split them out. And they started a movement to ask him to do that. And I at first signed their letter, and Ed told me, "Why did you do that, Scott?" And so then I changed my mind, and I called the players up, and I said, "I don't want to sign that letter. Take my name off," because Ed didn't want me to do that. And I was trying to support Ed, but actually the players were doing the right thing. I didn't really know what I was doing, to be honest with you. Sure. But Ed was trying to hold on to it a little too tightly, but once he kind of let that go, he had the company going, and he also let the Players Association go on its own way. And a lot of players felt that independence was an important milestone in disc golf history. So it all worked out. But the amazing thing about the 79, getting back to the 50,000 now. Okay, so here I am. I get to Huntington Beach, and I got my luggage and my coffin of discs. And Ed Hedrick is selling the night flyers out of the pro shop there where they sell the milkshakes. And he's got these, I had only just gotten my first set of night flyers. I bought a set of 8. He gave me a set of 8 when my mom bought me a disc pull hole. So the heaviest one was like 129 grams. And for a 40 mold that was supposed to weigh 119, that seemed like a lot. So I was pretty happy with this set. I was carrying like 4 of them, 122, 125, 127, 129. And I thought they were all pretty similar. I didn't really much know the difference because I'd only been throwing them for a few weeks. And then at that pro shop, I decided I should buy 2 more new ones. And he gives me one that weighs 150 grams. I couldn't believe that thing. Wow, it felt so heavy. What's a 119 doing weighing 150? And it looked so beautiful, brand new, glow-in-the-dark material. I was afraid to throw it. This is the night before the tournament. I didn't want to practice with that disc. I was afraid I'd scratch it. And that was my big mistake. See, I should have thrown every shot in the tournament with that disc. I should have practiced with it that night and used it. Even if it was scratched up, it would be better than a 125G. But I didn't know that at the time. See, right then, that was the moment where we were realizing that small is better and heavier is better. We didn't have bevel edge yet. That wasn't coming in for another 4 years, or 3 anyway. But we were getting small and heavy. And that's when it first started happening. Now, the winner, John Connolly, he was still throwing a lot of the 50 molds. He was big with the 50 mold, which, like I said, those were all the way out here. And he was using those for most. He was a distance thrower with 50 molds, and I guess he putted with them too. Tom Kennedy was the winner. John Connolly came in second in that tournament. But I didn't realize that the heavy, smaller discs were really, really better. I was still just using my 141 Frisbee a lot, and I was doing the best I could with it. But because it was so windy, you should use the heavier ones for drives, and you should also use it for putting.
Especially with those baskets you were putting onto.
Yep.
Yeah, right. Without a doubt. Well, so on flyingdiscmuseum.com, you tell a story about the 50K tournament and your drive on 17 in the third round. Essentially, another Frisbee player makes unintended contact with your drive and turns what should have been, Park City, Utah, according to Paul.
Yeah, that's true.
Into a testy 35-footer. And then, the way that was alleviated, well, it was kind of contested, but do you remember that? You remember that situation and that controversy?
Yeah, I remember it really well, and I wrote about it here and in the blog on Flying Disc Museum. Yeah. So, yeah, I mean, it hit G. Kirkland in the back, and she apologized to me by the time I went down the hill. I mean, this was a long hole in those days, and it was downhill and a really heavy, strong crosswind. So when I launched my drive down there, you got to put a lot of hyzer on it, and it was going straight at the hole, and I thought, oh, this is going to be perfect. It's going to skip on the ground right up to the basket. And that's what I really needed, was to figure out how to get a 2 on some of these holes, and a lot of them were blind holes where you're throwing behind pine trees and you can't see the basket, and I was baffled by those for some reason. I just didn't have enough time to practice the course. But this hole was straight away. You could see the basket, but it was just way down there, and there was a super strong crosswind coming from the ocean. Well, when I hit her in the back, my disc skipped off to a side, and the wind blew it over there. So I walked down there to get to my lie. She comes over and apologizes, and oh, don't worry about it. It's okay. And then the officials were huddled over there in the corner, and I thought, wow, those are the big guys. It was Dan Roddick, Steady Ed Hedrick, and Tom Baudet, who was serving as one of the officials. And I thought, what are they watching me for? And so my group says, it's your turn to putt. Well, first Tom Baudet comes over, and I admired him a lot. And he said, Scott, in these situations, you have to just play it where it lies. And I said, yeah, I know. And of course, there was no rule like that, and I didn't really know that, but I just kind of assumed I was going to play it from where it is. I wasn't asking anybody to move it closer to the basket. So he walks off, and he's satisfied that I know that. So I'm lining up my putt. Now I'm straight into this headwind, and the basket is a little bit elevated on a tiny little hill there. And I'm thinking, oh man, I'm putting into a 15-mile-per-hour headwind. This isn't going to work. And I was really disappointed. So I'm hesitant. In my mind, I'm thinking, should I use my 141G? It's bigger. It barely fits in the basket. But I always putt with my 119G. And then I realized, what? Maybe I should use this brand new 150G that I just bought from Ed Hedrick. And because it's a lot heavier. And I thought, no, are you crazy? You can't throw a disc on an important putt like this in the tournament, and you've never practiced with that disc before. So all this is going through my head in like 20 seconds. I literally said to myself, are you crazy? You can't throw a disc you've never thrown before. And then at the last second, I'm getting ready to putt, and the wind doesn't give up. And I realized I got to throw the 150G. So I reached in my bag, grabbed out this disc I've never thrown before, and I lined it up. And right before I lined it up, I say one more thing to myself. I said, this isn't going to work because you're going to putt a little bit nose up. And by the way, you see my grip on the bottom here. I always threw everything back in the 70s and 80s with what's called the bird grip. I always had this finger out here like this. I use this for distance and putting. Today, some players use this for approach shots, but today I only use it for approach shots, and most of the time I'm using power grip. But anyway, here I am lining up my putt, and I realize if I'm throwing this a little up to the basket, what's going to happen? It's going to hit the chains, okay? As soon as it hits, the wind is going to blow it back out. So this is really bugging me, and, there's a time limit, and I'm standing here thinking this wind is not letting up. Okay, what am I going to do? So I improvised. I said, instead of this nose up, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to throw it with hyzer. So what's going to happen is, if this works the way I want it to, the hyzer is going to hit the chains, and when it stops, this edge is going to be pulled down into the basket faster than anything else before it blows back out. And guess what? It worked just like that.
Nice.
Yeah. So nice. I hit that putt, and I was so happy to get it too.
I know you probably were a little disappointed with yourself at taking 10th in that, and probably thinking you could have finished higher. Obviously, it was a stack filled with amazing talent.
Oh, yeah. The talent was extremely deep. And I don't remember being disappointed with that, but I do remember being disappointed that I didn't practice those holes more before the tournament. I should have had more discipline. When you get to a tournament and you've never played the course, you got to go out there and learn those blind holes. Yeah. And I just, and maybe then I would have learned how to throw those heavier discs too. Instead of, I was still throwing the light plastic, and I didn't get very many birdies on some of those holes that were hiding behind the big Christmas trees.
Right.
And so the basket is behind a big Christmas tree. You didn't really know from the tee pad how far are you supposed to throw it. Is it a tight curve, or do you want to throw it flat a long way and get distance past the tree? And I can't remember some of those holes in my mind. I only had maybe one practice round. So in the tournament, I'm thinking, I don't really know exactly where I'm supposed to throw this. That was my main problem.
Okay. And you were playing at Huntington Beach, and that was just a disc golf park,
right?
Or at least like a whole park. Whereas later this summer you're playing the finals in the WFC at Irvine, and that's on the campus. You're playing over paths. You're playing around.
That was an amazing tournament. Yeah,
and that's captured on film too for anybody out there.
Yep.
You can hear Casey Kasem do the narration of that too.
Yeah, you can search it on YouTube for World Frisbee Championships 1979 or Disc Golf Championships 1979. I came in third in that. I was leading after the first day. I had the hot round, and then I kind of fell apart in the final 9. I made a bad decision on one throw. I tried an upside down throw, and I threw it too high into the branches above me, and it went out. It went OB. And that was like the 3rd or 4th hole in the final 9. And that Snapper Pearson went ahead of me on that hole.
That's right. I remember seeing, I just watched that this morning. I remember seeing your frustration at that with yourself at that shot.
Yeah. That was a dumb throw. Well, you see, the problem is my idea was it was going to slide on the grass right up to the basket, because the baskets were everywhere at that campus, was surrounded by OB with the ice plant was everywhere. So this basket was sitting only, 4 feet from the ice plant in front of it. And I thought, well, if I just throw a regular shot, it's going to just fly long into that OB. So what I need to do is slide it over that hill, and then it'll slide right down to the basket and stop. That was my brilliant plan, but I didn't execute it.
There's a lot about that. Brilliant plan. This is maybe this isn't gonna work again.
Yeah.
So one thing I wanted to ask you about the World Frisbee Championships, and this is only getting. Obviously I never went to one, and I'm only getting the reportage from the World Frisbee World magazine. But it was often not necessarily a highlight in the reporting, but there was always some kind of nugget about the convivial atmosphere, the extracurricular activities, and especially the Sunday night party. Now you're going down there like Tita when she played hers, too young to party, too young to really do any of that. You probably did when you went to the World Frisbee Championships. Were you staying at Caltech? Were you staying on?
Oh yeah,
in the res with everybody? So you were right in the middle of the maelstrom, the party atmosphere. Yep. Did you party yourself a little bit?
No, well, I never smoked marijuana, believe it or not, but a lot of the older guys did. But in 1979, my focus was on the overall, so I didn't do any extra stuff. They always had something going on, and I knew that was important to the overall atmosphere. Like, they had mini golf, or they had mini distance, or or putting championships. All kinds of things were going on. And, my focus was on, I got to wake up at 7:30 tomorrow, be first in line for breakfast, because I got to get my food digested before I start warming up for TRC or something like that. So I was very focused on the daily schedule. Where do I got to be for every event? I got to have my right shoes for that event. I got to have my right disc for that event. So, we're playing 6 different sports. You got to have different pairs of shoes, and, you got your golf discs in your golf bag. You got to have backup discs for that. You got to have different fastbacks even for self-cut flight, because in a strong wind, I had one that was more stable, and in light wind, I had one that was more understable. So I have to get all this lined up and organized, and I want to make sure I'm on time for every event. I don't want to be late.
Well, that's remarkable. I mean, a lot of people went there. Obviously, there was one note that I had read where the biggest struggle was just being able to qualify for the World Frisbee Championships. And once you were there, most people just kind of relaxed into it and had enjoyed life to its fullest. But obviously, you kept your focus on the prize, and you end up winning. I don't know what the individual event breakdown were, but do you remember vis-a-vis you and Cray? Because obviously he's your target. You want to beat him because he's the one that's closest in your age. Do you remember what kind of fight he put up in the overall race?
It was, I think something might have been, I don't know what happened, but he just didn't have his best tournament that year. So he was the presumed target that I had, because, I was maybe the underdog, and he's the defending champ, and he's still just an awesome player. But he wasn't having his best tournament. And so it turned out to be Kirkland, who was second overall. Ken Westerfield was a top overall player, and so was Tom Kennedy, who had won the 50,000 that summer.
Right.
So those were, and Jens Velasquez and Erwin Velasquez were always near the top. They weren't as strong in golf and distance and double disc court, but because their freestyle was going to win probably, and they were playing all the events. They were good at self-taught flight, and they got better and better over the years. So in 79, Jens was a top overall player, but by 82, he was in the running to win it.
Right. Well, the V Bros they always put on a huge show anyways. And, if anybody out there wants to go look, you can always just YouTube or Google or, go to YouTube and type in Rose Bowl finals. It's amazing to see, especially the coverage and where they would film it from. We've talked to many people already who were at those events, and they'd say, well, half of the stadium was empty, and the way they had the cameras pointed was at the full side. But even with 25,000 people on site, that must have just chilled your blood at times, being there in front of everybody on the biggest stage of the Frisbee world at that time.
Yeah, for in 79, all the events were held at the UC Irvine campus during the week, and then only the finals for some of the events were held in the Rose Bowl. They had the distance had already happened, and but they did a demo of distance in the Rose Bowl, and they did a demo of guts and a demo of ultimate, but the freestyle finals were there. So, and Eric and I made the finals. So that was really what kind of clinched the overall for me, was that we performed so well in the freestyle semifinals. Eric and I won the semifinals out of 16 teams. It was one big pool of the best 16 freestyle teams in the world. And we played first because we had played so poorly in the prelim, and we ended up having to go first out of 16 teams. And 3 hours later, the judges, after seeing the world's best talent, they still ranked us first. Wow. So we were excited, and that's what clinched my overall for me was, to have done that well in the freestyle that Saturday night before the Rose Bowl was the next day.
And just before we move on to 1980, just to say that some of the names in the freestyle finals, we have Dave Marini and John Jewell, who were at the top of their game at the time. Yep. The Velasquez brothers, Evan David and Corey Basso, who were showing new things out there. And then, of course, Joey Oakland, Donnie Rhodes, and Jeff Felderbaum.
Yeah,
they were the winners of that eventually.
Yep.
But, that's amazingly concentrated talent in one field at one time in history.
And Eric and I honestly wouldn't have even put our names in that category. I mean, on any given day, we would have been ranked maybe 10th or 12th out of the top 16 teams, maybe 16th. We felt, but for some reason we had magic in the semifinals, and we only dropped twice. And it was a kind of a windy afternoon. All the other teams that came up after us, they were having trouble with the heavy wind. And so we just put on a performance that Saturday afternoon in the semis. We hit our routine perfectly. It was a 100% choreographed routine. We had written it all down on paper, everything, and we'd practiced it over and over in a yard near where Eric was living in Fredericksburg, Virginia, and then in my backyard in the summer in McLean, Virginia. We practiced it over and over, and we hit it with only 2 drops.
Wow!
And that's how we got to be in the finals. And that once you get in the finals, then you're in the top 5. So we were ecstatic just to come in top 5. And Jens and Irwin didn't have their best final that day, but Joey and Jeff and Donnie, they obviously earned it. Donnie was the most amazing freestyler in the world for a couple of years there.
Well, that's you're actually covering the next topic pretty well, because it kind of applies to 1980. A lot of what you just said right there, and you repeated the World Frisbee Championship in 1980. In double disc court, there was Al Bonapane and Charlie Duvall, and Snapper and Ronnie, and then in guts, you won in guts in the World Frisbee or the IFT. Is that correct?
Yeah, that was 1981 when we won the IFT.
Oh, okay.
I didn't get to Southern California until 81, but Foothill won the World Guts Championship in 1980, right before I joined the team.
Okay. Oh, all right. So that makes sense. And then obviously, here the next questions were about whether or not you were choreographed, and obviously you just answered that question. But who did the music picking? I mean, were you picking the music, or were you guys making that a joint effort? I mean, who was the DJ?
Well, in 79, Eric was the music expert. Because he went to college and I didn't, and he was, listening to music every day and everything. So he picked it out. I think it was the Dixie Dregs, but I can't remember.
Do you remember a specific routine that you loved, or a specific piece of music that you loved to do a routine to?
Well, the most memory I have to give my credit to Johnny Dwork and Jeff Feldberbaum, because they played to Yes, All Good People. And
Oh, nice.
in 1978 at Rochester, Eric and I went to that tournament, and I remember watching them in the finals. And all my life, whenever I hear that song by Yes, I always think Dwork and Feldberbaum, and because those guys just peeled out to that song. It was so hot.
That's so cool how you make these musical footnotes in your life and go, oh wait, that song takes me right back to this point in time, and it's super vivid. It's pretty amazing. So in distance in that event, you were up against Dave Dunapace, Joe Youngman, and Cray, obviously, and those guys were in that order. But it's really amazing just to see how many of these names continue to pop up in all y'all's different stories. I knew Steve, for example, going back to it a little bit earlier. I knew he was a common thread in his early days, but I never really realized there was a parallel between your early days and his early days.
Okay. Yep.
And it's really cool how me and Paul talk about this all the time, about how names pop up, and I'm like, wait a minute. I mean, we just interviewed Pete Sontag last week, and he goes back to that early era as well. Maybe not quite as far, but actually, I think it's kind of a similar era. Actually, It's exactly the same era.
Yeah. I remember his name, but I couldn't. I don't remember playing with him in any tournament. Right off the top of my head, I can't recall. But I bet if he and I met again, I'd ask him, where did we meet each other? It would be fun to know.
Yeah, for sure.
Well, one of the things that some people may be surprised about is that Dave Dunapace was a legit distance champion.
Oh, yeah. Well, his arms were huge. He had amazing muscles, and I think he also used the Bonapane grip because he got it from Harold, who got it from Al Bonapane, who maybe Harold got it from Charlie, who got it from Al. But anyway, it was among those guys. It was popular with all of them.
Yeah, it's funny. Did you ever have cause to use the Bonapane grip for any of your?
Well, when I moved to California in 1981 and I joined the Foothill Guts team, I tried it, and I was throwing some gut shots with it, and Al was telling me, it gets a good dip, and Charlie was using it for backhand burn. But I just said, I guess I just am a little more comfortable with my regular grip. So I stuck with this one, and I had some pretty amazing throws in the IFT in 1981. I was only caught one time in the whole tournament, and I threw one. I only had one dump that I threw one away. So I cost our team only 2 points. That was pretty good.
That's really good.
That is really good. Holy
That's pretty
smokes.
amazing.
Okay, so we're just going to talk really quickly about 1981. One of the things that came up, I think this was the UPI archives when I was doing the research. There's a quick quote here about noting that you had the 3P championship at the World Frisbee Championships. However, despite you winning your third Frisbee championship this weekend, you were upstaged by 3 dogs. Now, the canine demonstrations.
I don't remember that.
Okay, but the canine feature was usually a big crowd pleaser at these things.
In the Rose Bowl, yeah, it sure was.
And it really did take away from the professionalism of the athletes because.
We would get that question a lot as Frisbee player. You could probably ask that to the Coloradicals too, as you go, or Dave Marini, for example, or John Kirkland, as they go around the country. Newspaper interviews are going to ask them, well, do you have one of those dogs? And, no, that's a different sport. And another funny thing that happens is a lot of times you might mention to a friend that you play Frisbee, and they'll friend will say, oh, my brother-in-law is a world champion. And you say, really? Who is it? And he said, well, his name is such and such. And you're going, oh, I don't know that person. And, I know all the world champions in this sport, but the reason that there's just so many people who can say they're the world Frisbee champion because they played on the ultimate team or they won the state championships, and then the story gets retold that they're the world champions. You get that story, you get all those things a lot. Like I can't tell you how many people have told me they saw me throw the Aerobie out of the Rose Bowl. Well, I don't think I ever did that. And I never threw it out of the Rose Bowl. But I did set a world record in front of the Rose Bowl throwing the Aerobie, but I just don't remember throwing one out of the Rose Bowl. But anyway, I think, but the stories change over time, and people say, you know, oh yeah, my brother's a world Frisbee champion. And then you realize, no, he's not.
Well, you know what? That's funny that you mentioned that, because I took a glass class in May from a master from Murano, and my friends that were hosting it live in Richmond, and so the class took place at his studio there in Richmond, and he was talking about his father-in-law, his wife's father, and he goes, "Oh yeah, he's a Frisbee champion." And then so he shows up later in the week, and I'm like, "Well, hey, we got something to talk about. I hear you're a Frisbee champion." He goes, "Yep. Oh no, this is a way overblown story." And apparently,
that's the way it goes.
It was from you challenge, like you see this on sportscasts in different markets on TV. You can challenge the sportscaster to play your game with you, and so he had actually challenged the local sportscaster to come out and play Frisbee golf back from your era, you know, like in the 70s, late 70s or early 80s. It might have actually been in the early 80s. And so he was like, so he was dispelling them. He goes, "That's not true. I wasn't in a tournament. I didn't compete. I didn't win a championship." But that guy was and still is a great racer. He does drag racing as his adult hobby into retirement and whatnot. But that's the same kind of thing. He's like, no. I'm not a champion. I'm not a world champion, especially not. Yep. So it's pretty interesting how that kind of happens.
Well, listen, we are getting close to the end of our regular Good Times hour and a half, even though we call it the Good Times hour. We don't want to take up too much of your time, but obviously there's a heck of a lot more to talk about. I know Mesa's going to want one thing, but could we possibly break this into a two-parter and have you back on for another show at another time?
Sure, if your viewers would be not too bored by that, that's fine.
Oh my goodness! I don't even care about our viewers at this point. I'm so stimulated. I'm so excited. This is such an engaging thing.
Yeah, we do have a lot more we can talk about. I can tell you about Niagara Falls, and I can tell you about the U.S. Open Championships, which, you know, a lot of people talk about the Rose Bowl, but they don't realize how Stork morphed the WFCs into the U.S. Open Championships because Whammo provided a limited budget. And those U.S. Open championships just exploded in popularity. People were coming from all over the world, and they were easier to qualify for because they just invited the different countries. And so you weren't invited only by the North American Series. Some of those had hundreds more competitors than the WFC did. And they were extremely popular all the way to 1990, I think.
Yeah, that's pretty amazing. Well, hey, so listen, since we just talked about the Aerobie, let's talk about that, about Niagara Falls, and let's call it a night for tonight. And then we can leave a whole lot of meat on the bone for the next time.
Okay.
So go ahead, spill the beans on that one, because I don't know. I think I've just heard very little bits and pieces of this whole story.
All right. Alan Adler invented the Aerobie specifically to try to make the longest flying object, but he had invented the Skyro before. The Skyro was just a single flat edge, and he wasn't happy with how the fact that the Skyro wouldn't stay straight for very long. It would fly really far, but only if you were really lucky. So he specifically designed this lip with computer simulations and his sailboat sailing expertise of how to design the sail of a sailboat. And he came up with this lip that he found out how to keep the Aerobie stable. So you can bend it like this to make it turn left, and you can bend it up to make it turn right. So if you just pull out an Aerobie out of a box or out of your trunk, it might already be turning too much to the right. So you got to throw a couple of them with your buddy about 50 yards away, and then you realize, okay, we got to tune it down, and then you tune it a little bit more. Now it goes straight. Okay, then he throws it back, and you realize it's still going a little bit this way, so you got to tune it again. Now, once you get that going flat, you can throw it really far. Well, when he designed this around 1985, he contacted me. He'd heard I was a big Frisbee player, so he contacts me and says, "I want to see if you can get the world record with this thing." So we went out to the Rose Bowl parking lot, and Stork shows up because he's the archivist for the Frisbee world records. And a friend of ours, Rick Schaefer, has a laser that he's going to try to measure it with. So Alan is saying, well, here's the Aerobee we can try with today. And somehow we only had like, I think one. And I say, well, let me look at this wind coming this way. I want to see if I can get a turnover throw. Because I was thinking like TRC. But you can't throw a TRC with these things. They don't plane out like a frisbee. See, when you throw a frisbee, like let's go with a frisbee here. You can throw it a certain way with Anheuser to get it to float slowly and glide down flat. That's how you get maximum glide with a distance throw in frisbee. So I was thinking I would try that with the Aerobee. So I just picked it up and tossed it like this without a run-up. I did a one-step run-up and threw the Aerobee, and I did get it to somehow flatten out, and it just glided all the way across the parking lot. The thing took off, and it kept getting a lift as it was going across the Rose Bowl parking lot. When the thing finally settled down, it hit a tree. We measured it. It was 1,046 feet, I think it was, something like that. That was the new world record.
Man.
And wow. Stork witnessed it. We had the laser gun with it, and Alan Adler was there. So there were 3 witnesses. And so that became the new world record. And then Alan Adler contacted me about a year later and says, I want to see if you can break that. I'll give you $1,000 if you can throw it over 1,200 feet, because that's 4 football fields. So he said, I've got $1,000 prize to throw at 4 football fields. And he said, I've picked out the place. We're going to do it in Fort Funston, San Francisco, where you're going to throw it down in towards the ocean, and the wind coming onto the cliff is going to lift it up. He was really big on lift, let me tell you, because I'll come back to Niagara in a second. So he brings me to Fort Funston, and he's got a whole box of Aerobees. I'm going to throw 300 shots that day.
Wow.
You can't believe how sore I was. I was sore for 3 days after this.
Wow, doubt
so
that.
He has a professional surveyor with a real laser setup, okay? And he's got that on a walkie-talkie from him. He's got the laser on beside me, where I'm throwing it on this sidewalk path beside the cliff in Fort Funston, and I'm throwing hyzer shots down. He insisted that I throw them down, out of sight, over the cliff. And I'm thinking, that's not the way we throw distance, Alan. I mean, why do you want me to throw it down, out of sight? I need to get it up. And he said, just trust me on this. Throw it down, and the wind is hitting the shore. The face of this cliff was, this was about maybe 60 feet high off the beach. So when the wind from the beach, from the ocean is coming in, hitting the face of this cliff, it lifts it up. Well, so I'm throwing down, and they're going out of sight, and we're not getting them. Nothing's happening. And then finally I throw one down, and it lifts back up, and we see it come back on shore way down the beach. And so he's on the walkie-talkie to the 4 spotters that he has working on his team. And he said, okay, we got a good one. Do you see that? Yep, we picked it up. We see it coming in. And so they were chasing that down. And I had only about 6 good throws that day out of 300. And I was doing all those with a 360 turnaround run-up on a tiny little black sidewalk path, asphalt path. And so I got really sore that day throwing 300 360s. And most of them went down to the beach and they're lost, but 6 of them came back up, and the winning throw that day was 1,257 feet.
Wow.
And it was in the air for 30 seconds. So when he was on the walkie-talkie, see, first thing it does is it goes down out of sight for like 10 seconds, and then we see it come back up above the cliff edge. That's when he's contacting them saying, okay, we got a good one. It's already 10 seconds in the flight. And then they're picking it up, and it lifted, and the wind carried it all the way over their heads, and they were chasing it downfield for another 20 seconds. And so that was 12:57.
And that record stood for until 2003.
For quite a long time. Now I think it's 13:33 by some other guy. But after I threw 12:57, so he knows now that I can throw 1,100 feet, and he wants to do a promotion on the night, to get it on TV. He wants to throw it across Niagara Falls. He measures it, or he looks it up, and it's 1,050 feet from Canadian soil to U.S. soil, and we're going to go up to the Canadian side. And I had thrown frisbees from there before with my buddy David Taylor when we went to the Toronto North American Series. So I knew that spot. The problem is the railing is up to my chest. It's 4 feet high. So the only way to throw over that railing is you got to be way back from the edge, and you have to throw Anheuser. But Alan was telling me, no, you got to throw it down. And I said, well, I'm not tall enough to throw it over the railing and down. What his idea was, he wanted the lift of the what do you call the mist of the waterfall was creating lift. But actually, if you look at the map in my book, it shows a diagram. The lift is over here where the Horseshoe Falls is, but the closest point to the U.S. is over this direction. Okay. So he's trying to tell me to throw it down into this lift, and we're not seeing most of the disc. We only have a few minutes before we are afraid the Park Service is going to kick us out of there. And I was worried about hitting the railing, and I smacked the railing with maybe my first or second shot. But I just decided, well, I'm just going to take my chance that I'll clear the railing, but maybe by only a centimeter. So I'll just throw it down. But I finally got a good one, and I yelled that on the video. You can hear the Buffalo TV station news. They picked it up. So I'm yelling, "Oh, that's a good one!" Because I saw that after I threw it, it stayed flat, and it wasn't going into the mist. It was just, I could see it, and we saw it go all the way across to the U.S. side. Wow. So just to finish the story, my dad was an editor with the Wall Street Journal. He was good friends with Tom Brokaw, who was the nightly news anchor. Everybody in America knew Tom Brokaw was one of the 3 nightly news. So he sees the news feed from the Buffalo NBC station, and for his nightly news, he decides, I'm going to pick up that story and put it at the end of the segment. So I was on the nightly news that night, and that means it was seen by like 20 or 40 million Americans.
Crazy.
That's incredible.
I remember Tom Brokaw.
Yeah, so that was I made it across with one or two of them made it across, but the other 5 were out of sight in the mist down in the water, and lost forever. But I only did like 7 throws that day.
Now, I thought I read somewhere where you taped a silver dollar.
Yeah, that was another stunt. He thought, okay, we're going to throw from a cliff over the Potomac River in Washington, D.C., and it wasn't nearly as far as the Niagara Falls throw, but it was hard to get it across. Thrown from the Virginia side over towards Georgetown, and I was able to throw those down and get it to stay straight. And so I threw several across that day. But he wanted me to dress up like George Washington, so it looked like I was throwing a silver dollar. So okay. the local Washington news came out. My mom found a white wig for me to wear, and she found the buckle shoes that I had to put on, and the whole get up. So I looked like a colonial Frisbee thrower.
Nice.
That's incredible. You're able to crack out a huge throw even with colonial footwear on.
Yeah, and a silver dollar taped underneath. So that made it wobble a little bit, I guess, but it wasn't noticeable. So.
Wow. Well, these are just amazing stories, and definitely everyone out there, I want to be one of those people. Go out, buy the book, Chasing the Overall World Title. You're gonna hear all those stories. Obviously, the Champion Disc Golf as well. Champion Level Disc Golf is a great book, but for me, where my personal interest is in the history of things, and you've got a lot of images and graphics and photos in your book too. That's going to help piece it all together. So, Scott, we can't thank you enough for taking all this time to chat with us and really set the record straight on a lot of things.
Thank you, sir.
And we really we have a lot more
family.
It's a wonderful Frisbee family for sure, and we have so much more we'd love to chat with you about. So we definitely would love to have you come back on the show.
All right, thank you very much. Pleasure being here.
Thank you for joining us, and great stories, man. I mean, it's I was telling Paul yesterday, we were chatting a little bit via text and email, and I was like, man, I'm just gonna have to mention that, and he's gonna take it from there. And you've done just that. Like, there was no 1-word answers from you at any given point.
Sorry about that.
No, don't be sorry. That's great.
No need to apologize. That's perfect, because it's
all right.
I don't need to necessarily ask you but one question, and here we go. Here's another story. So that's why we're here. Thanks a lot, Scott. Have a good evening, and we'll talk to you again soon. And I will see you in about 6 weeks.
All right. Take care.
Rock Hill.
Yeah,
right,
I'm cool.
Have a good one, y'all.